Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Josh.
It's good seeing you today.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah. I'm glad that we're doing this topic because you came up with it, and so it made me where I didn't have to think as much.
Oh, good.
But I still found myself
thinking about it.
thinking a lot about it, yeah. Pondering and brainstorming.
Good.
It is more difficult trying to figure out without your input
What
what
I'm
you
thinking.
want, which definitely fits with the topic of what we're doing today.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It's a meta level with that. Yeah.
It is, for sure. So just to let everybody know that's listening, we are going to talk about the right kind of conflict. And that's what we're going to get into when we come back. So don't go anywhere. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Therapist Take, and we are going to talk about the right kind of conflict today. And before we get into all that, just want to remind everybody to please subscribe to our channel. Make sure if you're listening to this on the podcast that you give us a 5-star review and share it with all your friends or whatever pleases the algorithms. Do that. And also, check the show notes. That's the other thing, too, that we try to remind people to do because we do our best to put as many resources as we possibly can or that we can think of as we're, putting the show together to go online. Sometimes we miss. I noticed the other day I missed a book or two that we'd mentioned. But we'll do our best to link the things that we talk about in the show notes. Okay. Through all that now.
Housekeeping done.
Yeah, housekeeping done. Check. So we're going to talk about the right kind of conflict. So before we start dialoguing about that, let's just kind of bullet point this for everybody so they know what we're going to talk about ahead of time. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the idea that conflict is actually good, which might surprise some, not others.
Sure.
The difference in good pain and bad pain. And we're going to talk about that conflict resolution or managing conflict is not about winning or losing in relationships. And the last thing is that it actually opens doorways to intimacy. So that'll be the final thing that we talk about in 30 to 45 minutes.
No problem.
Yeah, we're gonna
Easy peasy.
We're gonna solve the world's problems.
All the communication, conflict resolution problems.
Absolutely, we're gonna get it done.
Yep.
All right.
All right. So Josh, start.
Well, I mean, I think that when we as we opened, I was like, you came up with this was when I asked you about this a few days ago. Hey, we need to decide on our topic for the podcast, and this was something that you immediately came up with, and then I immediately went into conflict because I'm like, she said the topic, but what is it? What are we going to do? I don't know. And I'm like brainstorming, trying to figure out what's in your mind. You handle it very gracefully, I will say.
Thanks.
Yeah. But just kind of start out with why is it that it popped into your head so quickly? I mean, that's probably the quickest you've ever come up with a topic.
Okay.
So it obviously was on your mind.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it was fresh, but I mean, you and I both know that most people come to therapy, especially couples therapy, for communication and conflict resolution problems, right? So I think it's also something that we do so frequently that it's kind of like baked into other things. I don't even know if we necessarily notice that, we address conflict resolution skills or barriers or whatever today when we're taking our notes, right?
Yeah.
But since we work in the field of betrayal trauma, conflict is it becomes somewhat of a different animal, I think, sometimes after a betrayal. And I think that sometimes that conflict can feel really scary and out of control. It intensifies your emotions after a betrayal. And especially when you're not sure of what's happening next, people can be very scared of conflict. They can also feel very overcome with the anger that often is brought about during conflict. And so I think a lot of people, especially people who've been betrayed, can kind of fall into a pattern of conflict avoidance.
Right.
And so that's definitely something that's been on my mind about the function of conflict avoidance. And as I say a lot to people, let's play out the fantasy of avoiding conflict.
Right.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So kind of what goes through my mind is the first thing, just kind of let the audience know is that you and I, as couples therapists primarily, I mean, we're family therapists, we do it all. We do individual work too, but we're probably going to be talking about this mostly in thinking about couple dynamics, right? But I do think it's likely that some of the things that we address can apply to all types of relationships.
I think so too.
Because conflict avoidant people aren't just avoidant
in their committed relationship.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. But I do also think when you say that conflict avoidant, like I'm wondering if conflict avoidant people sometimes might not realize that there's a whole lot of them out there, like it's like, I think you'd probably have an easier time identifying people who aren't conflict avoidant.
Sure. That's probably true. Yeah.
Right. And so, and I think that's also, we tend to avoid conflict on a continuum too.
Yes.
So,
I agree with that.
I would say you're either conflict avoidant or you're not.
Right.
There's probably just a threshold at a point where most people would say that's not healthy anymore. Right. So, what about you? Are you
conflict avoidant?
Conflict avoidant?
Not really.
I was afraid to ask you because I am.
You're avoiding it. Yeah. Not really. I mean, I don't love it.
Yeah.
I think there's some people that love arguing. There's some people that love, really going back and forth. I don't love it, but I'm not afraid of it necessarily.
Yeah.
But you are. Is that what you're hinting at?
It's weird with me. It's one thing we have joked around about as therapists for years is that we become therapists so that we can help people with their problems because we don't want to deal with our own.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting because as a therapist, like I'm definitely not afraid of conflict, because that is what we do here. But I wouldn't say that I'm conflict avoidant in my life in general. I do think it's probably more situationally specific.
Sure.
And I've as the older I've gotten and the more self-aware I've become, I've been able to recognize those areas that have not been helpful.
Yeah.
And I think, anyways, I feel like I've been able to successfully recognize it and deal with it, and I feel like I'm definitely way less conflict avoidant than I've ever been in my life. I do think sometimes it surprises other people when I do tackle conflict because I do like things to just be nice.
Well, you're a nice person.
I'm a nice person.
Right.
Sometimes I can be not nice.
Sure.
And that can take people aback
sure.
sometimes. Yeah.
It shocks them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
but it's so nice.
It's a stark contrast. But yeah, I think for the there are certain types of you talked about like you don't like it, you're not drawn to it. I actually have realized like that at a point in time in my life, I started to realize that I am kind of drawn to it, and I'm the one that types out the long Facebook message and like, oh, I can't believe, and then I get to the end and I delete it. Like I very rarely will, I think it's maybe happened twice probably where I'm sending that and I'm changing the world, with that one response. Everybody's going to see it my way, But I have many times spent 30 minutes writing out a message or something, and then I'll just end up deleting it. And so I don't know what that's about.
No, you just needed to be putting it down was cathartic.
Yeah.
Right.
Not this episode. That's what that's about. It's a different episode.
It's a different episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let's talk about just the idea that conflict is good.
Yeah.
Or it can be good. It also can be bad, but it can be good.
I often will ask my clients to remember and talk about a time when conflict was helpful. And some people can't come up with a memory, a real experience, but sometimes you can, right? And it can be in a workplace setting. It could be with a friend, right? It could be with a parent. Probably is a little harder with your committed relationship, but conflict is good, just like anger is good, right? It's about the idea that we've got to reorganize some boundaries. Some things have got to be known, uncovered, addressed. And the idea that you can avoid conflict and grow and be known and know somebody else, those two things just don't go together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm glad you used anger as a comparison, because I think a lot of people, like if let's say a young couple has been married for, let's just say 5 or 6 years, and they're like, we never fight, we've never been in an argument, and I think most people would kind of be like, well, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get that, you don't want to be arguing all the time, but
Right.
that doesn't make a lot of sense. That you've never argued at all. It's like, just doesn't seem right.
You live together and you don't know.
And sometimes that's the case. But in my view, like, I also am alarmed by that. And a lot of times when that's the case, it's because there's conflict avoidance happening, and they're very good at it.
Sure.
And then a certain substance hits the fan, and it all comes spilling out. But as you said, like with anger, their anger can be good, it can be bad.
Yep.
If it's not managed correctly. But like, how would you tell the difference? So like, and by the way, for people listening to this, Carrie and I don't talk about these things in depth like this before, because we want it to be a raw discussion. So I really don't know what she's going to say right here.
Whoa.
But for you, Carrie, as a therapist, like how do you determine the difference of like, this is good conflict, this is either not so good or bad conflict?
Yeah, that's complex, right? I think first of all, that bad conflict is about trying to attack somebody else. It's a character assassination. It's about achievement. It's about making someone small so that you're big. It's about, hidden tactics, right? If I distract you with this argument, then other things happen. Secret agendas, those kind of things. That's bad conflict.
Right.
If conflict is also about power, right, and intimidation and bullying, that's bad conflict. That's not helpful.
Right.
That deteriorates a relationship.
Right.
Good conflict, I think, is honest. I think is self-facing, speaking for yourself and talking about what's going on for you. It's expressing versus concluding. Right? I feel this is what it seems like to me, those kind of statements. And I think that good conflict is also with the desire to be relieved of some of the intensity of the burden of these feelings. A lot of times I really want people that struggle with this to have an experience in therapy where they can have a fight, they can argue, they can disagree, and they can walk out and go, well, that feels better. I got that off my chest.
Right.
So I want you to start associating doing something that you're afraid of or, haven't done with an actual relief, right?
Right. Yes. So I think if you're in conflict, to kind of get the extremes out of the way and you're seeing red, probably not good conflict,
Right. Sure.
by the way. Like, at least if you're going to respond, if you're not going to, like, I need a break.
Yeah.
Because I'm seeing red, but if you're like, no, I'm going for it, probably not anything good's going to ensue from there. Some of the extreme things, name calling, berating,
Right.
But sometimes people they're not doing the extreme things and they're still in these negative, conflictual cycles.
Sure.
And I think one thing that you said that really stood out to me was that the ability to look at self, the ability to see your part in the problem, and when that's not there, I think a lot of times you're going to find yourself in unhelpful, interactions of conflict.
Right.
With
You're
each
going to
other,
stay spinning in that kind of cycle again. Right.
And it doesn't have to be, I don't think for people listening, I don't think it has to be, completely obvious that it was bad conflict either. I think, it's not like, the other person doesn't have to be crying at the end of it. It's just, it just wasn't helpful. It just, it really just genuinely didn't do anything good.
Didn't move the needle.
It didn't move the needle. Right.
Yeah.
And that happens.
And that happens sometimes too.
Yeah.
Normalizing, like sometimes, as my mom would say, you're just fussing, right? Sometimes you're just
fussing.
and just expressing, right? And I don't know that could be conflict, that could not be, right?
Yeah.
But doesn't necessarily move the needle. But good
Right.
conflict does. And good conflict challenges you to see things differently, or you hear things differently. Perhaps it even opens up curiosity. Perhaps, even the real goal. It accesses empathy and compassion.
Oh man, you're hitting all the buzzwords.
Yay!
I remember, my daughter has suffered from night terrors, and if you've never had a kid that's dealt with night terrors, then be grateful. It is a terrifying experience, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting about night terrors, or at least from how we come to understand it as we was learning about it, is that they're not in a dream state yet where they can have nightmares. So they're not even dreaming. So it's like, what's happening? It looks like demon possession, to be honest with you. That's why I'm saying it's really disturbing. And most kids grow out of it, as ours did. And when the doctor was telling us, like, here's a good, if you want to know a difference for how to determine is it a nightmare or a night terror, is by who does it disturb more in the morning. If it disturbs the parents more in the morning, it's probably a night terror. If it disturbs the kid more, it's probably a nightmare.
Oh, wow.
And because with night terrors, they don't even remember.
There's
because they're not dreaming.
State to remember.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm using that to illustrate that, if you're trying to determine, like, is our conflict being helpful or is it being unhelpful, is by examining what happens to you afterwards. Like if you're after a heated argument, for example, and you are taking time to ask yourself, what happened? Like, what was going on for me? And maybe you would ask, I think in the best case scenarios, I wonder what was going on for my partner. But at minimum, you're like, what happened to me in that moment? And when I go back to my partner, that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about the thing that we were originally talking about. I'm going to talk about something happened to me. And we can get into trauma and attachment stuff at another time. But but if you, after the argument, if you're just stewing and you're fuming and you just can't wait to just go back and pick back up and I got a better case now and I'm really going to lay it out.
Now I've got it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably not good.
Yeah.
But so I think it goes back to, like, self-awareness. It's kind of, the ability to look at self and to take it up what we call a meta level, which now I'm not talking about the thing we're talking about. I'm talking about the thing
that's driving the thing.
You're right. The thing that's driving the thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that in the spirit of self-awareness can kind of lead us into our next topic, which is where does this idea of good pain versus bad pain come in?
Yeah.
And this is trauma type talk. This
is trauma talk, right? But we'll often tell our clients, pick your pain, right? You can avoid conflict.
Yeah.
And what pain do you experience, right? You can have the conflict, and what pain can you experience, right? And I like to talk about that, right, with clients.
Right.
Let's play that all the way through, ride that train to the last stop, right? If you avoid this all the way, what will you gain? But what hurts, right? And if we address it, what do you gain and what hurts, right?
Right.
But picking your pain is scary because a lot of times we'll pick the familiar pain.
Yeah.
Then we'll pick the risk of stepping into the ring and really going back and forth.
Yeah. Right.
Right, with conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people, when I mention the idea of good pain versus bad pain to clients, for example, many of them really don't, they have no concept of this. They have no point of reference. Like all they've experienced, I say all they've experienced, but
often,
right. Most of their experience, especially in childhood, when it comes to pain, is bad pain. Like good pain versus bad pain.
Right.
You start putting it into like you start talking about in medical terminology, and you start talking about how doctors,
Right.
and then people start, okay, like physically they can understand,
Right.
or physiologically that, you know, so if you're healing from something, a doctor might want to know, like, hey, does it hurt when this happens? You're like, yes, that hurts. She's like, okay, that's normal.
Right.
That's what we would
Right.
expect. That's
That's the
how
good
we know
pain.
it's healing. That's good pain. But then you're like, hey doc, I just, had surgery on my elbow, but my neck hurts. It's like, whoa, that's not supposed to happen.
Right. Right.
So now that's at least a minimum an alarming pain
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be explored, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that what happens a lot of time with people when they get into conflict and they're having trouble managing it is that pain is pain is pain.
Right. Right. Right.
And so they're experiencing actually a good pain,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't recognize it as a good pain.
Sure.
And they respond to it if it's a bad pain, and
Right.
then so on and so forth.
Right. Right. It is hard to discern, right? I mean, I do think, you think about kids, right, when they're not feeling well or
Mm-hmm.
they're hurt, right? They don't know in their first experiences, like, oh yeah, that's supposed to hurt, right? Or
Right,
whatever. But clients often don't know that as well. They don't know the difference. And I think that a lot of times to try and start helping people discern or like start creating a continuum, right, from good to bad pain. First of all, is normalizing it's all pain.
Right.
And then second of all, that I think good pain comes from a place of truth, comes from a
Right.
place of honesty, comes from a place of intent to reveal and build accountability. And I think bad pain is covering up, creating secrets, kicking the can down the road, whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And that takes work to start to try and tease that stuff out.
Yeah. So I just want to give an example that I use sometimes to kind of, just illustrate, what this, might look like in
Okay.
terms of like good pain and bad pain. Is that nobody would, any self-respecting person, but also just any good person really doesn't really intend to want to hurt anybody's feelings, especially their partners.
Right.
Right. And so they will avoid it at all costs. That's when you're conflict avoidant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, well, that's pain,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to create pain,
Mm-hmm.
So I get it. Like, okay, we're not going to intentionally hurt anybody's feelings, but you have to be able to talk about things that bother you.
Yeah.
And you're married to a human being, or you're in a committed relationship
Right.
with a human being who is likely going to do or say something that's hurtful, and you got to be able to address that. It doesn't even have to be something that them saying something that's hurtful, just be something that isn't going to work for you,
Right.
at least long term, and so you got to be able to bring it up. They're like, but if I bring it up, they at least intuitively know it's going to hurt their
Right.
feelings at least a little.
Right.
And I tell them, like, you can use all the methods that you learn in self-help books or what your therapist taught you
Right.
to offer as much cushion as you possibly
Right.
can. But
Right.
when the words come out of your mouth, it's just going to sting a little, but that's okay. That's good pain. You have to be willing to let your partner's feelings be hurt by your experiences of them,
Yeah.
and it's not even hurt feelings sometimes. It's just people don't even want their partners to be confused, or
Right.
they don't even want to have an opposing opinion,
Right.
because it
Right.
generates conflict,
Right.
and
Right.
so just want to keep the peace. That's
Right.
all I'm about.
And then I'm being not a good person. I'm being
Right.
difficult, or whatever
Yeah.
that fear narrative.
Yeah, my job, I think this is especially true for men, but I don't think it's universally true for men, but that my job is to, minimize chaos and create as much order as possible. And they say, like, this sounds, Josh, like what you're saying is I need to introduce chaos. I'm like, that's exactly what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Because
Good chaos.
well, yeah, I think when you're doing
Yeah.
it,
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
because
Sure.
I'm glad you said that, because when you do it the other way, when you operate from that perspective, that my one job is to, eliminate chaos and create order, you sometimes will find yourself creating a much bigger mess.
Absolutely. And the same is for the traditional sense that women are supposed to be kind and understanding and forgiving and peace seeking, right? And so what kind of person, right? What kind of person would bring this up, right?
Right. So what is one of the common things we see women often doing who are trying to combat that, is that they're going to be conflicting and then try to take care of the other person while they're doing it, right? Which is, it's okay. Like you don't have to make sure they're okay for you to say you have a problem with something, and so we can go on and on about that.
We can, I know.
All right, so let's talk about, I think this one definitely is a big one, that because you kind of mentioned this in our, as you were talking about the first point we were making, it's not about winning or losing when it comes to relationships. And so one of the most common phrases I hear people say when they're in a couple relationship is, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't.
Right.
Or I can't win for losing.
Right. Yep.
Something that kind of implies that there is some kind of, idea of winning or a finish line or something like that,
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we do hear that a lot, right?
A lot.
We've talked, I feel like we've had hours of conversation about how to use that damned if I do and damned if I don't perspective, right?
Yeah. Which, by the way, I call the devil's courtroom.
I know you do. We have a whole, you think you've had some drawings about it maybe
Have
even?
I
think
drawn
so.
them up?
Well, you know how you do that sometimes. And as someone, I'm a competitive person. And so I that whole, there's not a win in this is like, ooh, that really still bristles me. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think the idea kind of similar to what I mentioned earlier is play this out that you win. That you win and your partner loses. What does that end up looking like? Right.
The relationship loses.
The relationship loses. Right.
Yeah,
and that you're all alone in your victory.
Yeah.
Right. And again, when it's driven by trauma and loss and betrayal, sometimes the idea of being left alone is safety seeking, right? Okay, that helps. That's what I'm at. But again, let's do that. Let's keep going forever and ever, right? Sometimes I'll have betrayal clients and I'll say, let's think this all the way through. This ultimate fantasy of never needing anybody, winning everything, and you're all alone forever.
Yeah. But you won by golly.
You win, and no one can hurt you. Right. I get it. Like that, even that sounds a little cozy sometimes, right?
Sure.
Not being hurt, right? Yeah. But you don't have a relationship. That's the cost.
Yeah. And I think most people, I mean, I know personally, I know the feeling of can't win for losing, I know that feeling. I think what's key is for us to recognize it as that's not what's happening here. This isn't a race, this isn't a competition, and you're not a child that's trying to win a contest. It's life, it's marriage, it's committed relationships. And so I think the burden of, if you have that feeling of I can't win for losing, the burden of relieving yourself of that feeling is on the person who harbors it.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. And so like, it's not anybody's partner's job to make them feel like they win.
No.
And the reason why is because there's no winning or losing.
Right.
You have to do away with that type of thinking. And that's why I like using the devil's courtroom as an example. I started thinking about this because it's an interesting thing to say out loud, right? I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. It sounds very spiritual, like I'm damned. I'm going to hell.
Up against the fates, yeah.
Right. And so I call it the devil's courtroom because you go into the devil's courtroom and you can plead your case. You can have a really good case, an airtight case. It doesn't matter. You're going to hell. Why? Because you're in the devil's courtroom.
There's only one way out.
Right. The devil's the judge, jury, executioner. The decision has been made.
Sure.
So then what happens is like, well, Well, if I'm not the devil, or I mean, if my partner's not the devil, then I'm going to take the horns off of their head and put them on my head. But that's not going to work either. Like, and so you just have to realize the reality is that you're not in a courtroom at all.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it's more like a place of healing, and there's no damnation. There's no, I don't know what the opposite of that is. It's just being and trying to work through conflict.
And I think that's often kind of like when clients feel that way, like a strategy is to say, I'm feeling damned if I do and damned if I don't. Right. I'm feeling backed into a corner. And the acknowledgement of that with your partner, by using those words to describe that scenario, that position that you're in, you're actually starting to make room for negotiation.
Yep.
You're starting to create the possibility that there is a win-win.
Yes.
Right? And not a damnation.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that when you start getting good at that piece of it, because I do think that's step one, and or two or something, somewhere in the beginning stages, right? You eventually will start creating the proper language.
Yes. Yeah.
To describe this phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so you will stop using words like I can't win for losing.
Right.
And you'll start understanding the conflict for what it is,
Right.
that you're two grown people trying to manage grown-up situations. You don't win, you don't lose. You got to work things out.
That's right.
It's part of what it means to be in relationships. And when you do it well, you don't free yourself of conflict. You're able to use it as a growth mechanism.
That's right, which is the last point.
Oh,
Josh, well done.
Great segue, Josh.
Josh, high five.
That's what's happening in my mind.
I know it is.
Great. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. So but that's so the last point is that when done well, it opens up doorways for intimacy.
It does. Yeah. Again, because intimacy requires what? That you're honest, that you're transparent, that you're genuine.
Right.
And that's where intimacy lives, right? And so sometimes conflict is a really, I don't know, can almost be a tool to strip you raw so that you can actually be honest, right? The pretenses have been pushed or clawed away, and you can finally say, I'm just really scared.
Yeah.
I'm scared that this situation has changed us.
Right.
I'm scared that I don't know what to do. And that's intimacy, right? That core raw fear.
Right. And just to kind of be clear too, it's not in the bedroom intimacy that can happen, but it's, when we talk about intimacy, we're talking about that connection.
It's very important to distinguish. Sex and intimacy are not synonyms.
Right.
Right.
But, the more intimacy you have, I think the quality of sex will be there, right?
Sure.
Or can be. Again, another topic for another day. But one thing that I want to say to that, though, is that a lot of people might hear, or at least that's where my mind went, is that, conflict can lead to, healthy conflict can lead to intimacy. And then your brain might go, ultimately, in my mind, the ultimate form of couple intimacy is sexual intimacy. It's a very special form of intimacy. And you might think of makeup sex.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And makeup sex is a thing. But makeup sex isn't, I'm mad at you, you're mad at me, let's just go have sex and just forget about it.
Yeah.
Right? That's
not
a
conflict
it.
avoidance
Tool, that's
actually.
Definitely a conflict avoidance strategy.
Right.
Yes. Makeup sex is that we just kind of dealt with something difficult and something hard, and we saw each other. We heard each other.
Right.
We worked it out like pros, and it feels really good to have that depth with each other and that connection. And it just can naturally lead to wanting to have more, It doesn't always, so don't get your hopes up every time, but when makeup sex is the kind of one of the outcomes of that, it's a very special experience.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think it, sometimes makeup sex can feel, have kind of its own category, for lack of a better word, of sex because you've kind of cleared the air, right? The conflict has led it to, like you're saying, to actually feeling more connected. It's cleared the air. And so you can have sex that feels rich and maybe even more, deep. And so, yeah, I didn't go to make up sex right away, but thank you, Josh, for bringing that up, right? But that's a part of it, right?
Not helping the stereotype.
Sure.
There,
I think often I'll use the words emotional intimacy to help people start to grow.
Right.
In maybe the way that they define and look for intimacy. But conflict is an opportunity to, be truly who you are. And you have to recognize that from the time we're probably beginning adolescence, we're already trying to learn how to survive this world and chip little parts of ourselves off that aren't as well understood or well received by others, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really courageous to kind of do that. Well, this is me, right?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna share it with you, and you may not like it, or you may even reject me. I'm doing it anyways.
Right. Yeah. That courage piece is huge because and just kind of like how you just said that too. Like this may happen, but I want to do it. I want to do it anyways. And that doesn't mean like you don't have things. You're not going to have to polish it.
No.
Right. I mean,
No.
usually when you're learning to do this and do it well, it's kind of just like anything else you'd learn. It's very choppy and not, unpolished is the best word I can come up with. But instead of going, oh, that didn't go well. I didn't like how that ultimately ended up, or I didn't like how I handled it. Instead of just going back to avoiding, you polish.
That's right. You give it another shot.
And you do it again.
And that's where strategies that a therapist and some self-help books can really give you, measurements and structure, right? Like setting, right? Timing, taking turns, right? Monitoring your intensity, taking time outs when you're overwhelmed, when your nervous system says, no, the train left the station.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to listen anymore. Those strategies, we didn't mention them, but they are really helpful. Those are the tools, I think, that help address the things that we've talked about today.
Right. I'm having a graduate school nostalgic moment. What does your mind go to when you think of a tool to help couples?
The speaker listener technique.
The speaker listener technique. So I didn't include the link yet, but I will definitely see if I can find something online to link so people can see what we're talking about.
Okay.
And as much as I laugh and we might poke fun, it's not a bad technique.
No. And the things that it's trying to teach you are important. The idea of taking turns, keeping it short, keeping it small, speaking for yourself.
Right.
That's very, very important.
I think it is fantastic for people, for basically beginners that are just they just have a lot of trouble with it. It gives you a set of rules and a structure. And it's very weird.
Slows it down.
But it doesn't have to be like that forever.
Yeah.
I mean,
you
modify
practice,
it as you go.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. Remember, slowing it down and keeping our brain accessible is really a lot about what we're trying to do in conflict. I do think, though, we haven't said this, and I really want to say this before we're done. When we're talking about conflict and even the nuances of it, we are not talking about violence.
Yeah.
And so just to make sure that we're being clear that violence is not acceptable, right? Threats of violence or actual expressions of violence in conflict that doesn't even fit the continuum of good to bad, right? It's just on its own not okay.
And to add to that, and I think this kind of brings us full circle, kind of where we started, is that the bad conflict begins long before it gets violent. Would you say, like, kind of going back to, like, we're talking, like, if you're berating and being verbally abusive and things, like, it's, and so there's never if I think I heard once in probably a show or something, and where a daughter was concerned about her dad yelling at her mother, and she told her dad that because her daughter had known someone whose dad hit their mother. And so she said, I'm just concerned because you seem really angry in the way you yell. And he said he was it really kind of throws you because he's really compassionate toward her. And so I'm really sorry that you experienced me that way. And he said, I just want to let you know that your mother would never give me cause to hit her. And of course the daughter picks up on that.
Yeah.
Wait.
Oh boy.
Give you cause. You know, like that's a dangerous way to think about relationships. And probably why I would say in that particular scenario, their conflict was very unhealthy, even though it never reached the point to violence. It was that approach or way of thinking about your partner or your
the
relationship,
punctuation of violence,
is very dangerous.
Yeah. And I think that, that's obviously needs to be said. But I think that we wanted to have this conversation because we want to normalize conflict. Right. We want to make it something that people, expect to have in their relationships and perhaps can develop skills and maybe not may not love it, but they can get a different level of comfort for it, right? Because things aren't always going to go your way and you need to be able to speak up. And, just checking off days and weeks and months on your calendar and not addressing important issues isn't really a quality of life. And we're here to help people have the best quality of life they can have, right?
Yeah.
So when I find myself more often saying, have the damn fight, like, maybe we need to address conflict, right?
Yeah.
And
it's
broad term.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Because I know we're trying to wrap up. You just made me think about something that, conflict kind of implies, or at least maybe the visual people might have is kind of like, going for it, kind of speaking up and sometimes that's it, right? Yeah. But sometimes it's not. Like sometimes it's using less words, and or in more, sometimes it's using your ears more.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just, I think Malcolm Gladwell has a podcast. I'll try to find it again and I'll link it. I have to always do that. But I think it's called like strong verbs, short sentences.
Oh, yes, I remember that one.
I can't remember who.
This was seasons ago.
I can't remember who he was talking about specifically, but it was a kind of a popular scientist, I believe it was a female scientist. I can't remember her name, but he said she had like a plaque or something on her desk that said strong verbs, short sentences, and he was like, and she lived by that. And I think he even played like some audio bits of her. And I'm like, and it's really these really powerful statements, and like she didn't have to go into these monologues and
diatribes,
right? And she just had a way with words, and she was okay with her statements. And sometimes that silence or the lack thereof, not silence, but the lack thereof words, speaks volumes.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
As I just did a monologue.
As you did. Beautiful. Strong verbs, Josh.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say.
So what? And filler words.
Let me try that.
Yeah.
I have a shorter version. But again, we could, as with all these topics, it's really hard to keep it condensed to, 30 to 45 minutes. But I hope that for the people listening to this, that it at least sparked your interest enough to, check out the show notes that we put in and the links and just don't be afraid to, take a chance on yourself, basically.
I agree. It's a good way to say it.
We take chances on people all the time, but take a chance on yourself.
Yeah.
So.
Nice.
Anyways, Carrie, it's good seeing you again.
Yeah, you too, Josh.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.